evening, Rabbi Eisenberg and Dr. Sandi Mann. Welcome to Sunday Night Live.
Hi, good evening.
How are we doing this week, Rabbi?
I think we're doing okay. I've had lots of different things on today. It was nice to have a simcha, had an engagement, and then we had an unveiling. And after the unveiling, people were invited back to the house where we had outdoor refreshments. So slowly but surely feeling a bit of, a bit of movement amongst people.
It seems certainly where the simchas are concerned that people are clearing a bit of a backlog at the moment.
Absolutely. It was John Feingold's son. John Feingold made the engagement for his son, and they got engaged 6 months ago, but we had to wait for this point for us to be allowed to do it. So this was
fantastic. Well, no, it's great that you're getting all of that done and getting through that. Do you know what's significant about this week, other than we have our good friend of the show, Dr. Sandi Mann, with us tonight?
I'm going to give it a guess. Is this a year?
It's almost a year to the day, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we started this venture, and there's still people out there watching it. Mostly Sandy's mom and dad, but other than that, we've got a couple of other people watching it too.
My husband maybe as well.
Yeah, maybe you're.
Don't be modest, David. You are very popular, both of you. You're a great double act, and people love you both.
Thank you. We actually had your dad round in Shul for a bar mitzvah practice. It was really nice also.
Yeah, I believe so.
We done the whole bar mitzvah practice the whole way through on Zoom. So for him to actually stand next to the boy and do the practice in Shul with the boy, he felt also was a real
it's amazing. And also this is actually the same bar mitzvah as my own son, who we were going to postpone. He did it last year, had a lockdown bar mitzvah last year. So had we postponed and done a bar mitzvah plus one, he would have also been this Shabbat. But we did a full lockdown last day. It was lovely. It was very special in lockdown. So I'm glad we did that. But all the best for bar mitzvah boys now coming out of lockdown.
Absolutely. Which almost leads us straight to you, David.
Almost seamlessly into our topic for tonight. Okay, so tonight's topic is one it's perhaps a little bit personal to me, because I seem to have found myself in the odd position that I've had discussions with my rabbi and my executive over the past few weeks, just in terms of dealing with business as normal. And I deal with shul business every day of the week. And certainly put in a good appearance on a Sunday night normally. But other than that, keen observers will notice that I've not been seen in Shul for quite a while. Now, I did come back to Shul, I think, immediately after sort of the first lockdown was lifted, and we came back in with the masks and the distancing and the usual measures and so on. And it was a bit of a curiosity shop, because you walk in and it's unlike any other experience that you've had in Shul previously. And I must say, personally, although I thought that the team that prepared for those services did an amazing job, to me it didn't feel as friendly or as warm as Shul perhaps should do, because you miss that social interaction. You've got your sort of your face covered up. You can't really get into much conversation with anybody. And so I think it's probably been good for spiritual gains during that time, Rabbi Eisenberg, but perhaps not as good for the social gains.
Absolutely. I'd actually be interested in hearing Sandy's, the psychological view on the fact that we are not seeing people's full faces. Is there some kind of, I found it a lot more difficult, A, in recognizing people, but B, also you don't get, the emotions that people show. Yes, you can see, I remember I once took voice lessons, and a fellow showed me that even if he covered his mouth, I could tell when he was smiling. But you don't really get to see it properly. And because we're not wearing visors, because they don't really do the job properly, we're actually wearing full masks, and we discourage people wearing visors. There must be something, in psychology written about the fact that people are not seeing each other properly, face to face.
Yeah, it's a huge problem that we're losing so much of emotional communication and that facial expression. It is a huge problem. And I do therapy. I'm back doing clinic work in person, and we have to wear masks. I'm doing a blend, and I would much rather do it by Zoom or online where we don't have to wear masks. But some clients prefer it with a mask. I'd much prefer to see somebody's face. I'd much rather be by Zoom and see somebody's face. Yeah, as Deborah says, Deborah Fraser. No, there's no smiling, but it's the nuances as well that you miss, and the muffling of the sound. I mean, sometimes if I go to a coffee shop or something and order something, and you're like, "What did he say? What do you want?" I can't hear you. You end up shouting. It's just not a natural communication. You're missing that discreet, that sort of more subtle communication. But if you think it's bad for us, it's probably worse for small children, babies who are growing up without really seeing many people's faces, and it's something of concern, but not majorly concerned. I think they'll soon catch up, but it's obviously of concern to parents or new parents.
It's an interesting perspective, that, with the new babies, because their world, any infant that's grown up in the last year or so, their world is almost entirely alien to the same world that you or I were born into, in terms of that person-to-person contact. I always remember when we had babies, that whole strangers helping themselves to a quick cuddle with the baby, that's all gone now, because you don't have that you can barely shake somebody's hand, never mind sort of pick up babies.
A lot of babies are growing up even more fearful of strangers than they used to be. I mean, obviously there's always that attachment phase around 8 months anyway, but they're growing up to not recognize facial expressions as much, or being a bit more fearful of strangers. And as I say, I do speak to a lot of parents. I've written about this for BBC on their website called Tiny Happy People, and also BBC Bite Size. I write for them. And that a lot of parents are very concerned. And I do feel, though, that kids are so resilient. So I think obviously parents are worried, but kids will soon catch up. I don't think they'll be disadvantaged for life. And anyway, the whole cohort are the same. It's like the GCSE year and everything else. They're all the same. They're all in the same boat. So I don't think we need to worry in the long term about that too much.
So just to go back to the topic in question, although Shul might not look the way that I might personally want it to look, because in my head I would like it to look exactly the way it was in 2019. But I'm an adult and I'm a grown up, and I understand that I can't have my wishes fulfilled just like that because it comforts me. But what's interesting is the longer that you stay away from a certain environment, you get used to the perhaps the creature comforts of avoiding it. And so what I mean by that is, your Shabbos morning takes on a whole different dynamic. So whilst we were in lockdown and nobody could go to Shul on Shabbos morning, in full lockdown, that is, I imagine we were all pretty much the same at that point. That you had to sort of make Shabbos into a day which really was in entirety from start to finish was a family affair, because you had no outside influence and so on. And for a lot of us, that meant that things relaxed slightly, because you can perhaps afford to get up a little bit later, or not get dressed quite as early as you might do on a Shabbos, etc., etc. And a lot of people, not just myself, a lot of people have got used to that sort of becoming their Shabbos, and it's been, for the better part of a year, celebrated quite differently. And the prospect of going back or going into an environment that perhaps looks a little bit like it did previously, however, is entirely different, is not something that they relish, and in fact fills them with anxiety. And so I this week I got the chance to speak to 2 or 3 different people who all wish to remain entirely anonymous. It may surprise you. It won't surprise you at all. But they are all struggling with the same sort of thing. And it's not just with Shul, Sandi. It's with other things as well. It's environments that they were perfectly happy and comfortable with, say, 12 months ago. And yet now they'd much rather... I'm going to use the word hide, because they'd much rather sort of stay indoors and away from that environment. How much of this are you seeing in terms of the people that you're talking to?
So I'm also seeing that a lot, but I think we have to distinguish between, or I have to distinguish as a mental health professional, between what's a mental health problem and what is a change of priorities and a change of interests. So there are people who prefer, for example, on Shabbat morning to stay at home and daven at home or read the papers, whatever it is. They do spend time with the family and don't want to go to shul. And that's a change in priorities or a change in outlook. They've seen a different world, they've seen things differently. The same with going out. People don't necessarily want to go back to partying or to entertaining. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, I really can't be bothered with all of that entertaining and stuff again. It's such hard work. And that's a lifestyle choice. And maybe they've not had that choice before, but now that they've had it, that's more of a problem for Rabbi Eisenberg and people, you know, or other Rabbonim, you know, how they're going to woo people to come back to shul. Not that everybody's like that. Of course, some people are desperate to go back and very happy to go back. So there's those people who I wouldn't say have a mental health issue. They just have a change in priorities. But then there's the other category, which is perhaps what you're alluding to, of people who feel that they're straying more into mental health issues, in that they get very anxious about going to do things that they would normally do or that they would really quite like to do. Or they even have panic attacks and severe anxiety attacks when they do that. So these are people who are not functioning or not able to function in the way that they want to, not necessarily in the way that other people think they should or the way that they feel they ought to, but the way that they would want to and what is normal functioning. So those are the people who do stray into mental health issues. And then it becomes a mental health condition like any social anxiety or perhaps even a health anxiety or an OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder type anxiety. So even before lockdown, we had people who were socially anxious, and we had people who were worried about hygiene and germs, and were worried about being in environments where they couldn't get home easily and things like that. So I would treat it in exactly the same way, really. It's just perhaps a new generation of people with those same problems, I think. So
are you defining, can I just follow up on that? Are you defining the mental health issue as something that's impeding with something that you'd rather do as opposed to a choice? So if I have the choice and I want to stay home, I have had, like you said, I've had people who said to me, actually, Rabbi, I enjoy davening at home much better than I enjoy coming to shul. There's no rabbi, there's no chazan, there's no laning. It's actually quite comfortable. I can sit and daven in my breezy conservatory, and it's actually much nicer than coming to shul. So those people, they're not really going through any mental health struggle. Where it sort of strays into mental health is where they want to do A, and the anxiety, whatever else it is making them do B.
Yeah, correct. Correct, really. Now, we do get a lot of people, I see a lot of people, not just at JAM, but from a private practice, where it's parents perhaps who are saying, my child has a mental health issue because they don't want to go to shul. And my job is then to say, well, is this a mental health issue or is this about choice? Because what is considered a mental health issue by some sections of the community, you know, my child is, this happened before lockdown, my child doesn't want to daven, they're a boy, they don't want to daven, go to Shacharis every morning, there's something wrong with them. It's not necessarily a mental health issue. So I do have to distinguish between what the person wants and what their lifestyle choice is. And as a mental health professional, that's what I have to do, rather than saying this is what Judaism requires or halacha requires. And sometimes there's actually a bit of a dilemma between a from therapist who knows what the halacha is and a therapist who has to abide by the ethics of their professional organization. And those ethics can't label something as a mental health problem just because they're not, the young person or anybody isn't meeting the halachic requirements of their, or the legal requirements of their religion. Same with Muslim communities as well. So yeah, there is that distinction, and it's quite an important one, I think, for people in my profession.
Well, that is correct in a way that, you know, somebody who doesn't want to daven is not mentally, there's no mental problem with it. He's just, he, for whatever reason, doesn't fancy going to daven now. That's, to label such as a mental condition is just, pardon?
It's they're choosing a different path, and you know, it's not off the derech, it's a different derech, and that's not necessarily a mental health issue, as you say. Yeah,
but even off the derech is not a mental health issue, really. It's a lifestyle choice, isn't it?
That's why I don't call it off the derech, I call it different derech. Yeah.
I think you call it different derech, whatever you want to call it, but it's not
not a mental health issue. But a lot of parents in the community will see it as that, and you know, please, can you fix my child? There's something wrong with them. They're not fitting in with the norms. They're not fitting in with what society expects. And I think that's one of the problems I guess we're starting to stray into with Shul and this, this communal expectation that we do things in a certain way on Shabbat or in the community. And people who suddenly don't want to do that, not suddenly, we've had a year of not doing it. Perhaps people will think, well, what's wrong with them? This isn't normal, but it's kind of a new normal. So it is a difficult one. It's a fine line. It's not it's not black and white, but there is a line somewhere between mental health issue and just a new normal or a new way of doing things, I think.
Well, what's interesting for me, in the sort of 3 or 4 people that have contacted me since we sort of announced the topic earlier this week, I had 3 or 4 people contact me and say, "Oh, that's interesting. I feel this way, or I feel that way about it." But if they were hesitant about coming back to Shul, I've asked them all the same question, which, if you could pick one aspect of coming back to Shul that is most off-putting to you, that is causing you the biggest issue, and it's interesting for the men that I spoke to, the issue was walking into Shul for that first time in a long time. And so that sort of walking into a room where nobody's seen you, but you should have perhaps been there for a while, and as you walk in, there's all that, "Ooh, look who's just turned up. Where have you been for the last 6 months?" So a lot of those men that I'd spoken to were extremely sort of hesitant to go through that kind of trial by fire, if you like, because you have to sort of, it's that first 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, nobody cares who you are or how long you've not been. You're part of the family after that. But inevitably, there is that kind of first day back at school jitters that people get about re-entering an environment that they were once extremely comfortable in, which to me was extremely interesting, because it was the one commonality between sort of 3 or 4 extremely different people.
And that does stray into mental health issues. And it's funny that you should say about the school, because we see that sort of phenomenon in lots of different settings. People who've been off school for a long time for whatever reason, or university and those sorts of things. So that first step, that feeling that everybody's looking at you, everybody's noticing you, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not just a feeling, and how to overcome that. And sometimes it can grow into quite a big problem if you don't sort of tackle it head on. So if that is an issue and that's what's stopping you, you do want to go back, but that's kind of stopping you. I would always recommend taking it step by step. So sometimes even approaching Shul can make you very anxious. So sometimes it's about going to Shul, going around, walking to Shul when it's not actually a service, or maybe for men going at a quieter time like Mincha, I'm assuming it is quieter, rather than in the morning, or just going at the end of the service or something like that, but gradually doing it in a more gradual way rather than the old way, so that you kind of get used to that and just get used to those feelings, because any anxiety will, like you say, will go eventually. It's just staying with that and just kind of getting used to it. We call that habituating to those uncomfortable feelings.
Interesting. We're going to have a look at some of the comments that are coming in.
When we were talking, fast.
Sorry?
Coming in thick and fast, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those topics again. But Clive Moss Barkley, originally responding to our comments and discussions about people wearing masks in Shul and that sort of face-to-face contact, Clive asked an interesting question that operating staff and special laboratory staff have worked in this environment for years, basically, in a sterile environment. Is there anything we can learn from them? I would imagine.
Is that actually true, by the way? Because I'm sure the doctor, when he comes out of the operating theater, takes off his mask and says hello to his colleagues without his mask.
And I would assume that the atmosphere in the operating theatre needs to be a little bit serious, and you're not necessarily. It's not an environment where you want people sort of joking around or watching each other's facial expressions. I think it's clear, sort of. A very clinical environment that needs to be extremely precise, in my opinion anyway. Don't know if you've got any thoughts on it, Sandi.
It's a very good point, Clive. Really is. They have been used to it for a long time. But yeah, I think there's a different element in that they do take their masks off. So they do the kind of serious, well, we'd have to ask them, I think, but I think they do the serious clinical work. and then they take their masks off and have a bit of a banter, I suppose. But I don't know. We'd have to ask them. It's a really good point. I suppose humans adapt and get used to anything.
So Chava Erlanger, hi Chava. Chava said that I think lots of people lost connection with community live, and I think Chava's referring to sort of face-to-face contact, and she said that that this happened after the Holocaust, and obviously whilst we can't directly compare this, there are elements obviously of people feeling disconnected and kept away from. I think I read the president's report. Actually, I've had a preview that is going out ahead of the AGM. But one of the lines that struck me there, that I think it was the first time since the Second World War that any Shul president in our history has had to go and hang a sign on the door saying that the Shul is shut for business until further notice. So it really is one of those moments where you've been forced to shut your doors, you've been forced to sort of send people away, and it's got to have a knock-on effect one way or the other.
But I think on the other hand, you've got the massive build-up of community virtually, and I think maybe that's kind of the problem, that we've got this brilliant virtual community for a lot of people through things like the initiatives of this one, what you're doing, but that people might not want to go back, and that they've got the community that they need in that sense. They've got the connection, and suddenly going back to that different world is uncomfortable for them. I think we're comfortable. A lot of people are comfortable, I think.
I think that's one of the elements of this discussion, and it's difficult for us to accept or sometimes sort of say openly. But some of the things that we have grown used to during lockdown, we now will start to incorporate as part of our life going forward, and we don't necessarily need to or want to let go of them. From the rabbi's point of view, I'm presuming being a rabbi to an empty room is more difficult, though, and that in the nicest sense, you need people sitting on seats in Shul, being present and taking part in a service, and you've got a massive challenge, and the Shuls, we've all got a massive challenge. How do we make that environment as welcoming and as comfortable for people as possible, but still maintain the correct sort of social distancing measures as well? Which, again, I can't think of another Shul that's done it as well as we have.
I think on the other hand, though, what I would say is that we've had these great programs, and in a way I've been given the opportunity to reach out to a lot of people on a Sunday night, whereas if I'd run a shir on a Sunday night, and I know how full our Shul is when we give shiurim. And even when we ran talks, so we run the talk, so the first time around you might get a lot of people, then it wanes, and you sort of you get less and less until you end up having the same 6 or 8 people there that will come and watch paint dry or grass grow for the Shul and pay money for it as well. I mean, we have those, you have the diehard people that come for no matter what you put on. And, it's very nice to support the Shul. And I think that the virtual, what we have over here, the virtual community, the virtual Zoom shiurim, this Sunday Night Live, other things that we've done. Miriam's done a Challah Live, for example, on a Thursday night. Yeah. She's never had the chance of having a Dvar Torah every Thursday night to go with taking Challah, to go out to a whole bunch of women. That she used to give a morning shir, and then that's what worked for her. In the evening, it didn't really work because we have the little kids, and I have to watch them, or she has to watch them. It just didn't work out. And a lot of people never were able to come to the shir, and always said to Miriam, "We'd love to come to your shir, but you have to make it at night. We work." And Miriam's like, "I can't because I got kids to take care of at night, and I can only do it during the day." So we had a whole bunch of people that were semi-retired or part-time working or fully retired that would come to Miriam Shir on a Wednesday morning, but then didn't really come. But the other people that want to come didn't really come to that shir. And now that Miriam has that, she's created something new. So the fact that we've been able to create these programs is wonderful, because it's given us the opportunity to reach out to people who we never had the opportunity to reach out to. On the other hand, as you said, in person is becoming very, very difficult, because, listening to I think we've changed slightly in that now I can speak without a mask, but for a long time I spoke with a mask. And I had people in Shul telling me, A, that they can't hear me. There are plenty of people that are hearing impaired that just couldn't hear because they couldn't see my face. And others saying that, also, if you tell a joke, or if you're going to say something humorous, or even as we said before, the facial expressions during a speech, I think they've done studies to say that about 65% of communication is nonverbal.
Higher, much higher.
Science was like 85. What is it?
Even higher. It's over 90%.
Over 90% of communication is nonverbal. So take somebody, stick them at the front, and do this to them. What you've done is you've taken the whole bite out of any sermon.
But you're right. It's been a nightmare for those that are hard of hearing, who perhaps didn't even know they were that hard of hearing, because there's a lot of us that don't go to the doctor to have these things checked out, even though our wife says you're deaf, you can't hear a word I'm saying to you. But
what did you say?
Exactly.
That's selective hearing, though, David.
it may be. You may be quite right. But a lot of us rely on lip reading, and we don't even know it sometimes. We need to see the other person sort of moving their lips. And
I think that's actually a really good point. We don't realise how much that even people who are not hearing impaired rely on lips. And that's something, because I go to an Ivrit chug. And when you're on screen I need to see the person, I need to see their face. It's all virtual, but if you've got all the different people and you've not got the speaker view and you can't see them, I can't hear as well as when I can see their face. So obviously when you're doing a different language, you're concentrating more, but it shows you how much that you are relying on those lips and following the facial expression. You don't realise, I think, how much you do rely on it.
Yeah, sometimes it's not even synced up. I find sometimes they're speaking and it's still moving when you finish speaking because they're sort of catching up. It was like, you remember the badly translated Japanese movies?
Yeah.
Remember they used to make fun of?
Yeah, so at least we don't have that in person, and we don't have to worry about people being on mute when they're in person as well.
Yeah.
Although for some people that would be a definite advantage. Okay, let's have a look. Clive Mosbarkley again. Clive, people would come back to the old Shul they knew and loved, but not as our Shul is now, socially distant and masked.
I'm not sure that's correct.
In some cases, Rabbi, I think we need to accept that might be correct for some
but I don't know if that's what this anxiety is about, because if we removed all barriers, would you come to Shul tomorrow, or would you say, if I walk into Shul tomorrow without any barriers, you still have that problem of everyone turning around and going, look who's here.
I think for me it has got to the point where it's the look who's here rather than the actual barriers themselves. So I can probably make this all about the fact that I'm a very social person and I like to schmooze and I like to come to Shul to see people, and half of the battle for me was that it was it was a social event. You would see people, you'd get to see members of your community, and you'd make a connection with them, and what we all had in common was this devotional service that we were all involved in. And I could probably sit here and tell you, yes, Rabbi, that's it. I'm not coming back whilst we're all wearing masks. But the truth is, if you were to give me a choice, the mask would probably give me a bit of health comfort at the moment. In truth, I'm not sure I'm ready to just stop wearing that either, even if that was a choice. And I think it's more that anxiety of walking in for the first time. I think that will be for a lot of people will be the biggest thing. For me, certainly would be the biggest thing. But I'm determined to sort of get over that and to see how it is.
I think you've pointed to another anxiety though, which might be significant for a lot of people, which is actually the health anxiety. Some people, if you took the masks away, they would feel even more anxious. But a lot of people are so used to this sort of fear of people and don't get too close, and it makes you a bit jittery, and you don't quite know how to behave. And we knew what to do before. We knew exactly how to engage with people and social interaction. We knew about handshakes with members of your own gender and all that sort of stuff, and perhaps hugging or kissing for women. I don't know, well, men do maybe as well, but we knew what to do. We kind of knew what to do, or we thought we knew what to do. Sorry, I just tripped on the chair there. But now we don't know what to do anymore. Do we we don't shake hands? Do we elbow bump? Do we, what do we do? And what if people take their masks off? And what if somebody's coughing? And should people have lateral flow tests? And it all gets a bit more anxiety provoking in those terms, because the rules have changed. The rules of social engagement that we've been involved in all our lives have changed, and we haven't quite moved into this new normal. We're in this transition stage, I think.
I mean, it's awkward sometimes in Shul. I sort of like, you put out the elbow and people are like, they put out their hand, and some people like move back, and you just have no idea what am I supposed to be saying to others? It gets so it's not such a big deal, but I'm finding exactly what you're saying, that people nobody knows what to do.
If you have social anxiety already, or you've developed it, then can be very off-putting. And the idea of negotiating all of that for people with social anxiety, or maybe people on the autistic spectrum, and there's probably a lot of people, because it's a spectrum, they might not be diagnosed, and even if they are, and all these rules that they sort of knew about have suddenly changed, and it can just put people off, and they may just be thinking, I can't be bothered with that. It's just too stressful. I'm just not going to bother.
It's interesting. We've got a few comments coming in. We're going to try and work through them. Kate Lurie, good evening, Kate. Kate agrees. She agrees with me in general. She says it's not just the davening, it's the shmooze, the kiddush, the children, the adults, the older people interacting with each other. And it is as a whole. Rodney Barkley, good evening, Rodney.
I'd like to comment on something that Kate said, actually.
Sure.
If you don't mind, I think that also raises an interesting point, because one of the things that I think we've really missed out on in the past year is not the organised social interaction. So we can all go to events, and we could virtually, and we can meet our friends virtually, and all of that sort of stuff. It's the ad hoc communication interaction that we've really missed. That sort of bumping into people that we're not friendly enough to arrange something, but it's always nice to schmooze with them. The kiddish type environment where you're schmoozing with people that you've not arranged to meet on Facebook, on Zoom and stuff. So I think Kate raises an important point there.
Yeah, no, it is a very.
Although I will say, by the way, David, that one of the things that I've seen has created a lot of cross talk within the community is the children's services. So of course everybody sits separately, whatever. I've been into the tot service the last few weeks. Either go after davening or doing the repetition of Musaf. And there's a lot of little kids coming back. So it's really, really nice. First of all, I walked out this week, and you see the buggy park that we have outside, and it's full again with all sorts of buggies and scooters, and it warms my heart to be able to see those again. But to see all these little kids, like, you're trying to, you're speaking to a whole room full of kids, and they don't even understand what you're saying, because a whole bunch of 2-year-olds. And I can't talk to them about the bracha on raisins. Everyone, Gary Freeman is singing in the front. He's like, Rabbi, I think your crowd's a little bit too young for the bracha on the raisins. So you just go and give out the raisins to the kids. I can't even give them sweets because they're not old enough. But you look around, and all these parents are really, they seem to be interacting with each other, which is great, because it's giving these parents a chance also to see their peers, other people who are going through similar things that they're going through. So you might have kids the same age, they might be teething, or they might be having other issues, whatever the issues are. And to see other people that are going through the same thing as you are, it's very reassuring, I think, for people.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think so much of all of these particular different things are things that we all share. So we may not all feel the same way about it, but certain of us do. And there's a lot here to be able to get through together, if you like. I'm certainly not the only person that thinks the way that I do, and there are others out there that would back that up. Just going back to what Rodney was saying, as the rabbi says, I am in the camp of those who prefer to daven at home, not because of the danger of COVID, but because of the discomfort of wearing a mask. However, I am desperately missing the camaraderie of being in shul. So that's interesting, isn't it? It's the actual discomfort of wearing the mask. It's being in that environment. Rodney says he would come to shul tomorrow without it.
I would say that Rodney's not the only one who's mentioned it to me. There have been other people that have said to me, so for example, somebody who religiously said Kaddish when their parent passed away many years ago, and had another parent that passed away, and he said, I just cannot come because I have asthma, I'm not sure exactly what it is, and I just can't handle the mask. I can't be there for 2 hours with a mask. too difficult. So he doesn't come to Shachris, comes religiously to Mincha Ma'ariv, and comes now, has started slowly but surely started coming to Shabbos davening also. But for a while he was coming just for the first two Kadishes right at the beginning. He came in, said brachas, first two Kadishes, and then left again. He just couldn't handle the mask. And, so there are people for whom this mask business is a real difficulty, not because they struggle with the concept of the mask, but physically they struggle with the mask.
Yeah. There must be a lot of people that feel that way. And I know that people struggle with that mask on, social, when they're commuting on public transport or whatever it may be. I had to sit on a train the other week, and it's a bizarre experience. It really, really is, and it's stifling as well. So it's it can be very, there can be a lot of discomfort associated with that. But there are some plus sides to masks. As Kate Laurie says, sometimes masks are good if you want to hide your anxiety or feelings. So if you're that kind of person who doesn't necessarily want to feel like they have to smile at everybody today, or the pressure of having to sort of acknowledge everybody facially and verbally and so on, that mask is something that hides that pretty well.
That's really interesting. Have you found that with a lot of people, Sandi, that's people who have hand anxieties have found actually this quite a liberating time for them? People the people with social anxieties, if everybody's shaking their hand and they don't like shaking hands and now nobody's shaking hands, it must be great for OCD people, I'm sorry, who don't like shaking hands with people. For them, it's great that nobody's shaking their hands. Do you know what I mean?
I've got a lot of clients. I've seen a lot of clients who the past year has been brilliant for them. And in fact, I had a lot of clients who didn't need to come to me for the whole year because all the things that they were doing with OCD, now everybody's doing. Before COVID, they were washing their hands excessively and not touching things. And now suddenly that's normal. They were washing their shopping and putting it in isolation. They were doing all of that pre-COVID, and they were considered to have a mental health problem. And now suddenly it was all normal. And they were like, yay, this is great. This,
Vindicated at last.
So they're very happy. And then I've got a lot of people with social anxiety who I was seeing, and they stopped. They didn't need to see me anymore because they didn't need to go out. They didn't need to face these things. But then I have other clients who the mask is really, really helpful to them. So, for example, there are some more unusual sort of social anxieties where people are perhaps very conscious about their nose. Actually, that's not so unusual. I have a lot of clients. It's not that unusual who obsess about the size of the nose. The thing about your nose, if you stare at your nose, it kind of grows. It looks enormous. If you just get very focused on your nose or any part of your face. So people who obsess about their noses become...
It's not just a Jewish problem.
I'm not even going to say that. Definitely not. It's definitely a thing. And most of the people I see who are convinced that they've got peculiarly huge noses have perfectly normal noses, perfectly average noses. But anyway, they become very... Or anything. Sometimes it's their lips. I've got clients with fixations about various parts of their face, and they're thrilled that they can hide this, what they consider to be this huge facial imperfection or spots, or as I say, lips. Sometimes it's about people feel that they're sweating and everyone's noticing them, and now they've got the face mask, no one can see them. So for some people, it's been an absolute boon, and they're going to find it really hard to go back to life as it was before, if indeed we ever do go back to that. Well, I'm sure we will at some point.
Interesting. Just going back to
what would you say to people like that?
Well, at the moment, I don't have to say anything because they're quite happy. So they will come back. You're getting different clients.
You need to coach them to the fact that, this is going to end. I mean, we're not going to wear masks forever. You need to coach them that this isn't going to end. So
the clients that drifted away because they're happy, they will drift back again when life goes back to normal, plus new clients. So it's all different presentations that you're seeing. So, different stages of the pandemic, you were seeing people with different problems. I'm not seeing as many people anxious about COVID anymore, but I did do, in the middle of the pandemic, I was having people who were young people, 20-year-olds who were absolutely terrified of catching COVID and convinced that they were going to die, which is, if they haven't got a health problem underlying, that was unlikely. I'm not getting as many of those. So at different phases of the pandemic, you're seeing different problems. You are starting to see much more social anxiety now, whereas they faded away. The OCDs, in terms of health anxiety, faded away, and they're now coming back. So you do get these different phases, but you can't treat them until they come back. You can't tell them, you're going to have a problem soon. You've got to wait for them to realize that there's a problem, and they will come back. and more, because people, as I say, people who never used to have social anxiety, or maybe, they had it manageably, it was sort of in the background. Now it's right at the foreground, and they're suddenly thinking, I can't cope with this anymore. And also it's the sort of stimulation. We're used to lower levels of stimulation now. We're not used to being with crowds of people and this way and that way and lots of different voices. We're just not used to that. I mean, you get that on Zoom, but it's very different. It's very sort of two-dimensional. But so the idea of going into an environment with, like a wedding or a simcha with hundreds of people and music and everything, I think that's quite overwhelming for a lot of people. The prospect can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah, no,
I was actually having an interesting discussion with someone, coming back to the point that you were making now about, different stages. Has COVID brought out a tremendous amount of mental health issues, or were there people that had underlying issues anyway that COVID has just brought them to the fore, or has actually created these issues?
It's a really good question, because everybody talks about this huge outpouring of mental health issues, but we do have to remember that some people's mental health issues improved because of COVID. A lot of people improved. So apart from the OCDs and social anxiety and all the health anxiety, all those sorts of people, not the health anxiety, the OCD, those people who improved because of the environment. You also got a lot of people whose stress levels reduced because they weren't commuting as much. They were maybe furloughed. They weren't running around as much. They weren't having the pressures to entertain. They weren't going to shul if they were Jewish and they were staying at home and having a day of relaxation and rest. So a lot of people, their mental health improved. Same with school. Some young people actually improved their mental health by not having to go to school. So there's a bit of a balance. I think probably the balance is towards there being more mental health than less, but still, we do have to realize that not everybody has suffered from mental health. But yeah, the people who are coming forward with mental health issues now, some of them are those who had most of them have underlying anxiety or underlying something that was always manageable. But you do still get the occasional person who has been absolutely fine, completely problem-free, mental health-wise, and suddenly they're completely overwhelmed and they don't know why. And for those people, it's perhaps more frightening. The ones who've always had a little bit of anxiety, the ones who come to me and say, I've always been anxious, but it's just worse now. Those are the ones that would expect it maybe. But the ones who say, I don't know what's happened to me, I'm absolutely terrified, this has never happened to me before. For them, it's a huge deal. They don't know where it's come from. And you have to sort of do a lot of psychoeducation to explain that these are really unprecedented times and we are reacting in a different way, and it's kind of a perfect storm that's created a mental health problem in some people where they didn't have them at all before.
Well, what would you say to someone who is coming forward now and saying, I'm having anxiety issues, or either one or the other, either I used to be a little bit anxious and I'm feeling very anxious, or I've never felt anxious before and now I do feel anxious? What would you say to the different people? Obviously you can't give a whole session now, but I mean,
it's the same as I do with any client. We'd look at the what we call a formulation. We'd look at where it's come from. We'd look at the things that have made them vulnerable, the factors that have made them vulnerable. We'd look at the kind of core beliefs that they've developed or that they've had throughout their lives that make them vulnerable. We'd look at the kind of unwritten rules that they live by in their life. So we look at how the current problems have developed, and then we look at what's maintaining those problems, the factors that are maintaining them. And often there's a kind of vicious circle, that they get into a situation, they get anxious, they can't cope with that feeling of anxiety, so they escape, or they have sort of safety behaviors. And those escapes and safety behaviors can actually lead to the problem being perpetuated. So you get into a vicious cycle. So if we can break the cycle by taking away their escape, or not taking away, but helping them to stay and not escape, then you can help them manage that feeling. But a lot of the time, for anxious people, it's coping with those uncomfortable feelings and not running away from them, but learning to cope with them slowly, gradually, step by step.
I'm going to just jump back into the comments again because we've got a lot to try and get through. Kate has suggested that we should all wear badges with what we are comfortable with, in terms of when we all eventually come back. Are we comfortable with the elbow? Are we fist bump people? Are we just waving? So Clive has also got some practical tips here. David, the first Shabbat you come back to Shul, be the first to arrive at 9:15 a.m. That might be the first time since my bar mitzvah, but I'm going to give it a go next week, Clive. I'll see you at 9:15. I'll meet you outside. Sue hadn't. Sue was in Shul and Shabbos. The heating was on upstairs. It was unbearable.
David,
Yeah.
related to that, sorry, I'm a bit delayed there, but it's a really good point that Clive makes, because he's talking about the cycle, a vicious cycle. He's saying, where's the maintaining factor? Let's break it at that point. So another thing that you could do actually is get there before everybody else. Not, I don't know what time you start actually, but if 9 o'clock, and greet people as they come in, as part of the security, and then they're getting it all out of the way.
I'm going to sneak in at 8:30. I'm going to hide behind the Oran, and when everybody gets in, I'm going to jump out and I'm going to go, "No, where have you all been all this time?"
When I say Vahim Saron and you scream at me, I'll get the shock of my life.
Sue Haddam was in Shul and Shabbos. The heating was on upstairs. She thought it was unbearable, but with the mask, it was good to be back for her third time. But feels isolating in a way as you don't interact with anyone. So sorry about that. Very warm.
A lot of people are starting to interact, by the way, after Shul outside. There's a lot of conversation that goes on. I think now that that you're allowed to meet up outside in bigger groups, we're not shooing people away as quickly as we did when it was lockdown. We were allowed to daven, and we used to come out and say, "Everybody go home, don't stay outside and talk." And I think now it's actually really healthy for people to come outside and for people to talk. Wouldn't you say that?
You have security issues, though, don't you?
All right, that's true.
CST has one now as well.
You can't do right for doing wrong in this place.
But I think all of this raises the really important, really interesting issue about how Shul isn't just about davening, and how davening isn't just about davening, because the answer to all of this could possibly be, well, you don't go to Shul for the social interaction. You go to Shul to interact with Hashem, and it's all about that. But nobody's actually mentioned that so much. The emphasis is really about this being a social experience, and maybe that's kind of the whole point of the minyan.
Because I think that sometimes when you talk about one of the people that I spoke to this week described going back to Shul that davening in Shul, they were examining, I suppose, davening in Shul and davening at home. Which is better? And they were saying, well, look, in Shul, in theory, it's meant to be like a direct line to Hashem, because that's the place where you're meant to pray. And when you pray with a minyan, then it's meant to be stronger, and your connection is meant to be stronger. But I'm going to skip to a comment that Deborah Fraser has made, which I think goes hand in hand with people's normal thinking about Shul davening. She says she misses the singing. At one point, we talked about outdoor services. Is that an option? We could talk about that again, Deborah, perhaps not tonight. But the point is, a lot of sort of the normal davening, it was call and response, wasn't it? And it was something that, particularly Yom Tov time, it was a sing along, for want of a better word.
Sorry, Sandra, you're about to say something.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's a balance, isn't there, between the davening and having. I can't believe we're thinking about the high holy days again. It's come around so quickly, and what we're going to do. Up. But a lot of people like the shorter services, and the idea of going back to those marathon services is just not appealing for a lot of people. But on the other hand, you've got to balance that up with, we've got the shorter service by cutting out the singing, and people like that, and it makes them feel spiritual. So there's all of these things that need to be weighed up.
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to say, by the way, I was just going to mention, I was thinking when you were saying about the social aspect of Shul, and it should really be about davening, I found the thing about it, even in very, very Haredi shuls, a shul is not only about davening. I find you go to Beis Medrash, people have kiddush there, and people sit together and shmooze. My wife often used to say to me that men don't need to have a social circle. They don't need to have the social programming going on all the time. He says, because they see their friends every day when they go to shul. So he says,
it's the pub for from people, isn't it? It's our pub.
It is. It's amazing because my wife says, if I want to see friends, I need to go out and see friends. You have Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, you don't need to go anywhere. You go to Daven, you see your friends there every time. And she said that men have this social one-upmanship almost on women. Again, it's not meant to be sexist or anything, but she says you have it very easy because you have an inbuilt social communication area called Shul. Yes, you go to Daven together, but before Daven you'll have an Nada, and after Daven you'll have a Shmuz, and maybe, as you said, you'll have a Kiddush after Davening, and even if you don't, even it's during the week. But somehow there's a lot of social aspects that go on in the frumest of all Shuls.
And I think that's why actually men have suffered quite a lot through the lockdown, because they've suddenly had that pulled from them during the actual lockdowns or when Shul was closed. And I think women have been, I don't like to generalize, but I think generally have been better at making those connections. They've always had to, like you said, Rabbi, that they've always had to do that. Whereas men had it all in place and it was suddenly pulled from them, from under them.
Absolutely.
Just to go back to the comments again, Sharon Hood says she walked in and walked out. I think the heating was a technical error. I think what she's saying is that the people had a very warm welcome to Shul this week. Usually the Hilton Suite is too cold, but this week it would be perfect. The temperature in Shul is it's something. It's something we can't control. I think Paul is working on getting that right. Jane Johnson raises sorry?
We've had some hot weather as well.
We have, we have. And it's one of those places that when it's cold, it would always be too cold. When it's hot, it will always be too hot, and vice versa. So, Jane, good evening, Jane. Sandi, you've mentioned OCD. I wonder if you could tell us whether you've seen a massive increase during the pandemic, and also whether you're aware of the condition pandas. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. She then goes on, not to be confused with Pan's people, but she then goes on to say an increase in OCD is probably often to do with anxiety and mental health issues caused by the pandemic and lockdowns. But I just want to raise awareness of Pan's pandas, which presents with symptoms like OCD and tics, but is actually caused by a faulty immune reaction to infection, which results in inflammation of part of the brain. And there's a lot of research into the links it has with long COVID. Is that too much for you to handle right now?
Well, I think the point about what Jane's raising is this sudden onset in children of these OCD symptoms, and I think that's what she's trying to distinguish with the pandas. That it's a bit different from other kinds of OCD, normal kinds of OCD, which you tend to get a more gradual onset. Things tend to get worse. They've always had those tendencies. So I think what she's trying to raise awareness of is sudden tics or sudden OCD behaviours, which may be related to COVID. But I think I'm seeing that sort of thing with other people. You talked before about as other people as opposed to children. You talked before about whether, I think the rabbi said, whether people have had these mental health conditions all the time or whether these are new. I am seeing the occasional case of people, whether young or old or older, of people who suddenly develop some strange mental health symptoms like the tics, or suddenly develop insomnia, or suddenly develop something where they've not had any previous history at all. And you do wonder whether, as Jane points out, I mean, I'm not an expert on that condition, but whether there is some physiological reason that may be related either to to COVID or some other infection. So it is entirely possible.
And I suppose to a certain extent, just the breaking of, humans are creatures of habit. We have a daily cycle and a daily routine. And even if we weren't the most orderly of people before lockdown, we all knew where we had to be or what we were meant to be doing at any given time. And then it suddenly got broken up, and we learned how to spend our time differently. And at the beginning, that was extremely difficult. So that, people who are told that they need to stay at home and not go to work, some of them just couldn't cope with that. But it then suddenly, at some point, you do learn to cope with it. It becomes more of a comfort than it does something that you're unhappy with. Maybe it's just a break of routine that has sort of freed everybody up to look at their life entirely differently.
Yeah, I think there's a huge part of reassessing our values in our life and saying, well, there's a lot of people saying, well, I don't want to, it's not just about Shul, but I don't want to go back to the life that I led, on all the different issues and the stresses. People want a happier work-life balance that a lot of people have managed to achieve during lockdown, and they want to retain that. But I think the other issue as well is that you talk about creatures of habit. and we like to know what's happening, what we're doing. But at the moment, we're in this transition stage of moving from one phase to another. Whilst we were in a phase, and especially when we were told what to do, we might not like being told what to do, but it was easy. We knew what the laws were. But now we're waiting to see what life is going to be like on the other side, and we're in this transition phase, and it might be June 21st, it might not be, might be July the 5th, whatever, I don't know, but we don't know what even it will be like for the Yom Noraim. We don't know how life is going to be afterwards, and that's uncomfortable. We like to know, we like to be predictable, we like things to be predictable.
So let me ask you a question, and I'm not just trying to get a free therapy or advice session here. We've had more than enough of tonight, but what advice, I mean, other than being non-judgmental and other than being extremely understanding and welcoming to people who may be struggling with whatever aspect of getting back to where we would like to see them in Shul, if you like, what sort of advice would you give, not just Rabbi Eisenberg, but we're talking about Shuls and Rabbonim in general, who are now have a task ahead of them, especially given that you've got Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur around the corner at some point, and that will be one of those moments where we will want to sort of see as many of those people partaking in customs and traditions that they had been partaking in for years, but that cycle might have been broken last year. What general tips can we offer our lay leadership to support their members back in?
I think it's interesting because some of the things that we're talking about are things that people have been facing when they visited a new shul or a new community, or they moved to a new community, or people who perhaps were secular but coming to shul for bar mitzvah or something, and that they didn't know what to do and how to behave and what the norms were of that particular congregation, and they felt awkward and uncomfortable, and everybody sort of seemed to know what they were doing and where to get their siddur if they had to get it, and how to behave. And I think there's a lot of that we can take from that to look at. That's how it is now, and what we should have been doing then is what we can be doing now and going forward is that we need to present a welcoming front and assume that people don't always know what to do, because now we know they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. What happens if they haven't, are they meant to have signed? Well, obviously can't sign in Shabbat, but what if they haven't booked, and how unwelcoming is it if they've not, and where do they go, and what
happens if they have an aliyah? Do they take off their mask? Is it on? Is it off?
Or what if they need, if one goes to the cloakroom, and they don't know what to do. And so don't assume, my message is, I guess, don't assume that everybody knows what to do, that everybody's been coming to shul. And as you rightly point out, and bravely point out, I think, David, you know that you haven't and you found it difficult. So people, I'm sure you're not the only one, who are coming to shul who might not have been or before, and also the rules are changing. So don't assume they know what to do. Keep giving them the instructions, the directions, the advice, the guidance, and keep that going forevermore, because even if people, all this is over, there's still people who are going to come to shul sometimes who don't know what to do, either because they're from a different community or whatever. And I think we've had this assumption before that everybody knows, and now let's learn from that and let's see that everybody doesn't know, and it can make life so much less anxiety provoking for individuals if they know they're going to go to a shul, they're going to be told, well, they're going to be welcomed, told where to sit, where to put their coat, how to behave, what we do here, there's a kiddush after, this is where you go, whatever. Instead of just assuming that everybody knows, maybe even introducing them to somebody, mentoring and saying, here, let's have a peer buddy. Would you like to sit next to them or whatever? But being welcoming, not just now during post-COVID times, but generally going forward to people who might be anxious and we don't even know about it, or just don't know how your community works.
Well, stewards effectively that can sort of say, look, this is where you can sit.
Yeah.
If
welcoming,
yeah. That's interesting. Rabbi, is there anything you've I mean, it's been thought-provoking tonight. I can imagine.
Very interesting, Sandy, as always.
Imagine in the run-up to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, these are things that we're going to be discussing a lot more.
Yeah. I mean, what we discussed last year, and the thing that I'm worried about is the, I guess, the cloaking of not wanting to come back to Shul and I can't really be bothered for the high holiday services as anxiety of COVID. And so we had this conversation a few times, David, where we spoke about is people go everywhere. They're literally everywhere. And as soon as you say to them, well, come to Shul, COVID is, COVID makes me very, very nervous. And you're like, well, you were in Tesco yesterday with 600 people and you didn't seem very nervous then walking around every single aisle. I know, but Shul's different. And the idea that, pardon?
No, all I was going to say is that I'm not going to lose Parnassa if I don't come to Shul. Maybe I will, but it's a long game. We'll find out. But in terms of day to day, if I don't go to work, for instance, and put myself in front of other people, then I will lose Parnassa. If I don't go to Tesco's, I might lose the ability to put food on the table. So I think there have been certain functions that people have been carrying out during lockdown that might feel counterintuitive, or they may feel like it sort of is a little bit hypocritical, but I suppose they've had to get on and do that. I suppose a better example of what you're saying is that people going to the football match, for instance, when you're sat in a crowd of however many hundreds of people, even if you are a little bit distant, that is something that you might.
But some people see that as an important, especially in this country, we know football being so important to people's culture. It's something they can't give up on. People are, so everybody has their thing that that's important to them or it's not important to them. And I think that's part of the issue is that I think as people see Shul, or certain people see Shul not as important, they will sort of say, and this is what we spoke about last year, that it's not worth the risk to do something that they don't feel is worth their while. So it's not really the risk. It's more the fact that because it's not worthwhile, they'll sort of, the risk will sound a lot bigger in their head, whereas going to Tesco is important, and therefore, yes, there might be a similar level of risk, but it doesn't speak to them in the same way.
Yeah, I think we as just listening to this and just thinking, but we as an executive and as a shul and you as a rabbi, we're going to have to bridge the gap between the people that, let's face it, it's just more comfortable perhaps to spend your Saturday morning differently. You got used to doing it the other way. And maybe you had a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur last year that was actually less full on. It was less pressured. It was more relaxed. You only chose what you actually did and didn't do, and you had a really good reason for doing it. And then also to bridge that gap to the people that have genuine, I suppose, more deep-founded anxieties about coming back. And I think that the message should be the same to both, is that we need to be as welcoming to everybody as possible, to give them every opportunity to come back without any prejudgment at all, even if they haven't been there in the last 2 years, 3 years, who cares how long it's been, but to say, look, you are forever welcome here. You're especially welcome here over Yom Tov, and we're going to go out of our way to make this a welcoming environment. I think that what Sandi has said in terms of preparing people for what they might see and hear in Shul being different to what you'd normally experience, I think is key to that welcoming experience. I would like to be able to, I don't know, write to everybody and say, look, this year, this is how Yom Tov's going to look. You can always grab hold of, not literally, but you'll be able to find a steward. You will notice them because they are marked like this and that. If you've got any question whatsoever, these people are going to be able to help you. And I think in some ways that's going to be extremely helpful.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sorry. I wonder if we can put that we could put that maybe in the Yom Tov post. And it's definitely something we can say, before Rosh Hashanah, we send out a mailing. So you just put in the mailing, dear all, wherever everybody gets the post. Just so you should know, we understand that the last year has been a very anxious year for many people, and people might be anxious about coming back to Shul. And this is what we propose to do to make sure that, for those people who are feeling a little bit nervous, this could be what, this is what we're suggesting to make you feel more comfortable. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sandy, we're going to say something. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say that I've actually dealt with quite a lot of people who had anxiety about Shul pre-COVID. So it's not something that's necessarily new. And going back to the whole anxiety and mental health issue about it. And one of the things that, talking about the masks and the discomfort of the mask, that you can probably advise people to do now as well is to take mask breaks. Going out of Shul at appropriate times, getting some fresh air, taking a mask off. And that can help people with anxiety about Shul who maybe had anxiety pre-COVID as well. Because one of the things that can be quite anxiety provoking is this idea that everybody's going to look at you if you leave. And I see this as well with students in lectures. A lot of students struggle to go to lectures with anxiety because, if they have to leave, if they have a panic and they have to leave, everybody will notice them and it will draw attention to them. But if we kind of make that the norm, especially with the masks, that it's okay to leave, you don't have to feel, you can go and get a fresh air, then that takes that whole anxiety away of everyone's going to look at me if I leave and think things of me. And that you're just having a mask break. And, these things normalize it and take away that other layer of anxiety, I think is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Maybe even from time to time, one of us needs to get up and remind people that if they haven't already, they should go outside, take a breather of air, and come back in. I don't think it'll be unhelpful. Certainly, keep people awake during the sermon, Rabbi.
Absolutely. Everybody out. I'm about to give a sermon. You can have a breather outside.
5 minutes breather now. Thank you very much. I've got the impression that I think we could probably carry on chatting about this for hours, but it's given us a lot of food for thought, and it's covered all the main areas, I think, that are general anxieties about sort of getting back into the swing of things and going back into an environment, particularly a social environment where we may be nervous for whatever reason of other people, other people's opinions, whatever it may be. To me tonight has been immensely helpful, but I can tell from the comments from people in general that they here you've got a great one from Rodney. Special thanks to Sandi. Brilliant to hear your words of wisdom.
Thank you.
But I think that's echoed by everybody. I think there are a lot of different issues here that we've discussed. Some people not coming back because of the way that they feel. Some people not coming back because they just need to take that first step. Some people don't like the masks. Whatever it is, it's incumbent upon us, I suppose, to make people as welcome as we possibly can and give them every opportunity to come back and to be welcomed back as nicely and as openly as possible. So a big thank you to everybody watching at home. Thank you for supporting us over the past year. It's now a full year that we've been doing this. And I guess I can...
If you have any topics, please, we'd like you to come forward and then give us the things you'd like to hear about, because we'd like to be able to talk about those things. If it interests you, hopefully it will interest everybody else as well, and we can make an evening out of it. We'll find a specialist, we'll find somebody to speak about it, or David and I can make believe we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, we do that pretty well sometimes.
I think we can sometimes.
I guess the best way to close would be to say good night to everybody. Have a great week. And I look forward to seeing you in Shul. I'm going to give it a go, and we'll see how that goes.
Come at 9:15. You'll catch the early bird, and nobody will see you walking in.
They won't see me walking out 9:16 either. All right, everybody.
Take care.
Have a great week. Sandi, thank you. Bye-bye. Goodbye.
Bye.